Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Sapience Institute Live. We are back again, like every week, talking about the intellectual arguments for Islam and refuting the contentions against it. And like always, we are going to be engaging with you, the audience, and speaking to you about what are the hot issues right now in regards to this area. So to begin off with, what I want to do is have a quick sort of recap of what Sapience has been up to for the last couple of weeks. So Hijab, we've seen a lot of stuff on the Sapience Institute YouTube.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of very interesting arguments and a lot of unique guests as well.
Yep.
So if you could tell us, what have you guys been up to? What have we been up to for the last couple of months?
Before I do so, I'm just going to share this live on my community page.
Sure.
Just so that everybody gets it.
Wa alaikum salam to everybody giving salam. MashaAllah. Share this video, like this video, tell your friends about this video, get more and more people to join. This is definitely the place to be, because we're going to be dealing with all of those issues, all of those doubts, all of those contentions, all of those arguments which have been floating around online. So do a quick sort of recap for us. I mean, in terms of Sapience Institute, what have we been up to for the last couple of months?
So it's important sometimes to just kind of go over the objectives in the first place. So what we're trying to do with Sapience Institute, you could say that there are two main objectives. One of them is to rationalize Islam, or to make an intellectual case, argue a case for Islam. And the other one is to answer objections relating to it. And all in all, the overall objective is to make a rationalizable case for Islam. And so what we're doing is basically we're kind of compartmentalizing the different things we have to do. So for example, if we have objections, we may have moral objections, quote unquote scientific objections, quote unquote historical objections, quote unquote manuscript, or whatever it may be, right? So these are all objections that we're dealing with on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have arguments.
Mm-hmm.
So we have arguments for God's existence. We have arguments for the veracity of Islam, the truthfulness of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have arguments from history. We have arguments from prophecy. We have arguments from hermeneutics. We have arguments from psychology, whatever you want to call it. And together, what this shows is, what we want to show is, not only is Islam a comprehensive way of life that is compatible with human psychology and fulfills human purpose for life, but it's also provable and demonstratively provable. So that's why you can say that we have two kinds of objectives, and every single week we have deadlines that we try and kind of complete. We have research deadlines, we have output deadlines from videographic perspective, and then we've also got kind of things that we're doing in the background, which would only be known after they are done. But all in all, working hard, there's output. It's a team effort, and hopefully by the end of, let's say, this year, 2021, there will be a lot of noise that has been made.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair for that introduction. So we're going to go straight to our guests. There's actually a lot of you online. And like I've mentioned in previous live streams, we're going to be dealing with arguments for Islam, arguments against Islam, political views, or issues to do with Islamic law, anything like that, or general questions about how to be a better Muslim. These are the sort of things we do not cover in this live stream, because alhamdulillah, we have a lot of people trying to jump onto the live stream and talk to us, and we want to give priority to the actual objective of the live stream, which is to deal with these issues.
And just to kind of caveat that, it's the only time where we will be invoking Islamic fiqh or jurisprudence or law is in so much as it meets our objectives. So for example, if there's a particular shubha of Islam that requires us to kind of go into that, that's different, okay? But we're not going to be giving fatwa here, is the point, and we're not qualified to do that, and this is not our field. There are many ulama out there that can give you fatwa, verdicts and stuff like that. And so this is not the purpose of this live stream.
Absolutely. So let's go to the first person, Brother Yusuf. Welcome to Sapience Live. Please unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Your voice is very low, my brother. Could you do something to fix that?
Is this better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, great. I just have. I'm sorry.
It's a bit loud now.
It's fine. It's fine. No problem.
Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, awesome. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so I just have one question. I was reading Bertrand Russell's book, The Problems of Philosophy, and in his chapter, Our Knowledge of General Principles, he mentions a priori. So he talks about logical principles and the principle of induction, deduction, and the principle of inference, and all, everything is fine. But then he speaks about ethics and how, for example, how humans want to be happy. That is a priori. Or how humans want to extend their lifespan. That's a priori. So my question is, can humans derive objective moral values from a priori, such as these that he mentioned? That's the only question I have. Thank you.
Could you rephrase that in a perhaps different way? I didn't quite understand what you were trying to say there.
So he meant, like, in his chapter, he talks about a priori in ethics. So my question is, can a person, for example, who doesn't believe in religion, let's say for example an atheist, he says, hang on, hey, look at these things that are a priori, and we can say that this is objectively moral because of this being a priori. This, for example, we want to be happier as human beings. We can derive. That's my question.
So firstly, I'm not aware of what you're referring to in terms of the part of the book, Problems of Philosophy. I remember going through it many years ago, and it's a bit, I think I gave up at some point.
It's a small book. I think I remember what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But basically Bertrand Russell has to, like, he came at a time where logical positivism was quite strong. Don't forget the Vienna Circle, logical positivism. That's why one of his students was Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he had a theory of language, and he developed it. In the beginning, he had the Tractatus, and then he went over and developed another theory. But the point is that the logical positivist school, for the most part, they saw ethics as belonging to a class of meta-ethics, which were basically meaningless. So this verificationism or positivism became redundant. After about the 30s or 40s, when there's an interview of A.J. Ayer.
70s.
Is that when the interview? Did you see it? Yeah, where he basically realizes the mistakes that he made.
It's self-refuting.
And he's self-refuting and so on. Yeah, so these kinds of arguments, I'm not sure if he actually formally made an argument that it's meaningless in the Problems of Philosophy, but he did say that, ethics belongs to a category of, metaphysics, and therefore it's not demonstratable, it's not knowledge in the same way as something which is. But remember, Bertrand Russell tried many different things. One of the things that Bertrand Russell tried with Frege is to equate logic and mathematics, and this was this was one of the biggest projects that he had. And then he realized, this is all an experiment in the early 20th century, because he realized that that's not possible, that they were two separate things. So there are two kind of failed experiments, if you want to call them that, in the early 20th century. One of them was this experiment was to try and link mathematics to logic, and to say that almost that they're one and the same thing. And then they came and literally retracted their statements afterwards. And the other thing that was a failed experiment was positivism and verificationism. These are two failed experiments. It's pretty standard now for people to realize that it's, like you said, self-refuting. It's not. So they're saying that anything which is a priori knowledge rather than a posteriori. So in this case, we're talking about meta-ethics. We're talking about things which we don't a priori before the event or posteriori after the event. Here we're talking about things which are kind of in the mind, right? So he's saying that anything which is abstract in this sense and not extracted through sense datum, okay, is something which is not extracted through sense datum. It's something which is meaningless. I mean, I don't know if this was his formal view in that book, but this was certainly popular. Yeah. So once again, if that were to be the case, then that view itself would be redundant, or the view that meta-ethics is meaningless would itself be meaningless. Then you'd have like infinite regresses of meaningless statements, and this is why logical positivism. You can watch it's really interesting. It's online. You can find the AJ Ayo and Brian Mabby, his name is. That guy it's a guy that, there's the show that they sit together and they talk about philosophy. I think his name is Brian Mabby and AJ Ayo. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but they're sitting together. And he's kind of like retracting a lot of the stuff that he used to believe in, because he was seen as one of the forerunners in the early 20th centuries in terms of positivism.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's my. Actually, I have a small question, a quick small question. So it was still about the book also. In the book, he was talking about, for example, how the principle of induction and the principle of inference, for example, they're principles that cannot be proven, since proof presupposes them, but they cannot also be disproven. Yeah.
Axioms.
Yeah,
it's called axioms. That we're talking about, like in the base of mathematics, you have axioms and theorem. These are what at the base of, like, how do you prove that AB equals BA? How do you prove that? There's no formal way of proving what's AB equals BA. There's no formal way of proving that. So it's an axiomatic statement, which means that there's no proof for it, but you have to believe in it in order to do any kind of mathematics.
Yeah.
And so these are the kinds of things that, like I said, Frege and Russell were struggling with, and they wanted answers to, but they couldn't get the answers that they wanted to.
Okay, I see. Okay, so basically, I don't want to, have a long question, but I was trying to see if, for example, a Christian, if he, for example, would say, well, because for example, the principle of inference or the principle of logic of non-contradiction, it's not proven, so you can't use it to debunk the Trinity.
But they'll be making a logical argument there, isn't it?
Yeah. So basically, because I have this self-argumentation a lot. With myself to see, like, all the possible, angles and views that I might run into. So my end conclusion was basically this person would have to be like, like Nietzsche, for example. You'd have to not believe in anything.
Look, if someone says this, then you've cornered them already, because at the end of the day, we have rational faculties, right? And we're reasoning. And if these two things were not in place, then any conversation would be redundant from the very beginning. There would be no conversation. Then any postulation is meaningless, because if we're saying there are no rules to dictate truth and falsehood, or to dictate something which is corresponding with reality and something which is not, there are no rules of such, then any claim you make is meaningless. Even the claim that you make that there are no rules will be meaningless. And so it will be the most self-refuting thing. You cannot do anything after that. You've basically shot yourself in the foot. But what we do say as Muslims or as theists is we say that you cannot explain rational faculties. You cannot explain them on a naturalistic worldview and an atheistic worldview. Or the question we would ask atheists or naturalists is, how do you explain them on a naturalistic worldview? Because as you do, like you do the evolutionary stuff, so there's no evolutionary reason why truth is preferred over falsehood, for example. Yeah. So once again, and you can add to this, but from my understanding is that, theism offers a very plausible explanation for why rationality exists in the first place.
Yeah.
A, and B, why there is such a thing as logic and these rules of inference or whatever it may be. It offers, and namely that there is a knowledge that endows such creatures or such sentient beings with those things.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And I think something else
Yep.
to take away from this, it's quite good that Hijab went over the history, is to show that even if there's a strong consensus, and it's very difficult to get a consensus, but in a way, the logical positivists and those after them, they did have a very big following. So I guess you can say that they did have a quasi consensus in some regards, especially with the Western world. However, the idea turned out to be basically ludicrous, right? Self-refuting, essentially. And it just goes to show again that, something may be picking up and people are agreeing with it and everyone else is agreeing with it and it's going really, really far, then it can come crashing down. And I think that's very important. And it's kind of linked to the whole point about the fitrah and how we shouldn't, if somebody comes with an argument and it's just all about arguments, how actually these things can, you can have consensus for a long time, but those arguments can completely fail. Another very good example is actually the example of justified true belief, right? The sort of idea that to have knowledge, something has to be justified, has to be true, and you have to believe it. And then obviously Edmund Gettier came in the 60s and then just completely smashed that whole idea. So that consensus about justified true belief existed for around 2,000 years in Western philosophy. And all it really took is one philosopher to come in the 1960s and it's completely gone now, right? So I think it's very important that these philosophical movements, which they look like juggernauts at times, which are unstoppable, how they can just come completely crashing down.
True. Okay, no, that's great. You guys answered my question. But after I finish, a recommendation. After I finish Bertrand Russell's book here, what book should I read after this one?
Well, what is your objective? That's the question.
Well, my end objective is to travel to Japan after I learn Japanese, and do some do da'wah there. Basically, I'm learning Islam at the moment, memorizing Quran, and I want to learn philosophy and logic because I feel that would be a sort of a ground that me and them can meet on, and then we can discuss further things.
I'll tell you something very interesting about Japan.
Okay, please do. I know a lot about Japan, by the way. So let's see.
I mean, from a dawah perspective.
Oh, okay.
I went there in 2015, and then we had another dawah mission in 2018. You would be surprised. It's not, logic and reasoning and science and using this to attract the Japanese, it's not going to work. The Japanese as a people are quite unique. They're actually unique in terms of Asians, that when Korea has had success in terms of missionary work, likewise there's other parts of Southeast Asia where people are converting to other religions. Japanese hold on to their traditions and their sort of beliefs, and dawah in Japan wouldn't really be too much along the lines of what you're thinking, like people who are quite inclined towards philosophical ideas and these types of things. However, what I would do is, since you're interested in this topic, what I would do is I would recommend you check out this page called Japan Dawah Movement. Message them. Alhamdulillah, they're about 40,000 likes on Facebook, which is pretty good for a very small community of Muslims in Japan. Amongst them, you'll find a brother called Imran. He's worked with IERA and volunteered with us for about 6 years.
Okay. I know him. I've seen him before.
Get some tips and tricks from him, and you'll see. He'll give you a very different perspective of what the Japanese, how to bring them to Islam and stuff.
How was your trip to Japan, man? How was that? Did you enjoy
it? It was exactly like you expect Japan to be. Like you go to a country, you're like, oh, that's not how I expected.
Did you go to Tokyo?
Yeah, we went to Tokyo. We went to a masjid called the Tokyo Kami, And in this masjid, every
It's
weekend, it's the main mosque in Japan. It's built.
Yeah, it's
like
it's built by the Turkish embassy. They built it there.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And actually, there was about at least 2,000 visitors who visit every weekend.
Wow.
Japanese people, yeah, school children, tourists, and
Do they understand English quite well?
No, but everybody
No.
in the mosque speaks Japanese. They have Japanese converts. Japanese people generally do not speak any English, and I was actually quite surprised by that. I thought they would speak English. They don't.
Wow.
They're very. The thing is, how you attract them is not by talking about religion, because they're not interested in religion. How you attract them is by being exotic and different. So, for example, not sure if you know this brother from West London called Najibullah. He's tall like you, very tall brother with a very long beard. So he used to go and work in Japan. He used to sell car parts, and Japanese people used to come up to him and go, "Oh," and then he's just talking and like touching his beard. And they loved it because it was different. And when I was in Japan, obviously I looked out of place. I saw people just looking. So people, they like something interesting, something different. But it's only from a cultural point of view. If you try and directly talk about Islam, people are like, they're sort of put off. But there is, alhamdulillah, a growing community of Muslims in Japan. And in fact, there's been convert communities in Japan for many, many years now. But small numbers, very small numbers.
It's pretty low.
But they take Islam very seriously. When they convert to Islam, they take it very seriously.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Japan's also going through a massive issue in terms of its sociological change from a traditional society in which everybody lived under a roof and you took care of your parents and the parents took care of the grandkids, to a very capitalist society. So there's actually a lot of people who have depression. And this isn't just me saying it, you can look up the stats on this.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
Yeah. And suicides, people not leaving their bedrooms.
They have very small places of residence in there.
Yeah, they have that as well. Tokyo is very expensive.
I remember, maybe this was about 10 years ago. I'm not sure if it was, it was Andrew Ma. There was a show called Mega Cities. I'm not sure if I was, I think I was learning in school or something. I was at school at that time. They were showing us the show. And Andrew Ma was going to different cities. And he went to Tokyo, and then he went to Dhaka in Bangladesh. And he was like, I'd rather, there was an interesting thing that he said in that show, which I found really interesting. He said, the community in Dhaka, in the slums, in the places where the shanty towns or whatever it is, he says that felt more I'd rather be there than I would rather be in somewhere like Tokyo.
Wow.
Because of the individualistic culture in Tokyo.
Yeah, and this is very interesting point you raised, and I hope no Japanese people get offended by this, because this isn't Japanese culture, but it's the current situation. The Muslims that I met who'd actually migrated and are living in Japan, they said it's very cold here. Not physically, but in terms of people and their reactions and how they talk to you and how everyone's individualistic. And, this morning I took out my daughters to go to the park, and on the way back, there's an old lady who said, "Good morning." And I, replied back, and, that does not happen in Japan.
Really?
That does not happen in Japan.
Can I actually give an explanation for that?
Yeah, sure. That's it. Don't you? This is really great stuff.
It's because it's not that they're very individualistic, not because of any Western influence. It's because they don't have any religious direction. So the belief that they have, which is called Shinto, it has nothing to. It has no scripture, by the way. There's no book for Shinto. There is no a set of guidelines or the Ten Commandments or Arkan of Islam. It has nothing. It's just a very superficial, very like sathi, belief that is just okay. So there's some spirits around us, and let's just respect them, and let's have them give us good luck. So there's no reason for anyone to be good to one another. There's no reason there's no benefit, metaphysical or physical benefit. There's no benefit for that in the least. And they're very in terms of as a culture, as a people, they're very shy. They don't like to speak. They don't like to actually give their thoughts of how they actually think. Some people there's this idea that Japanese people are very like, they have a lot of, akhlaq. They're very like, but most of the time they're just very. They don't want to actually say what they feel like or what they actually think. They always hide it most of the time, which is why there is not that that communal connection that you have with other people.
You know, I always find interesting with Japan. I don't watch these kind of animations or whatever these guys got.
Animations, anime.
The thing that I watch or have watched in the past is, like when MMA goes there or when kickboxing goes there or something.
Oh, what's that called?
Bob Sapp and these
huge
that.
Oh my god!
Have you seen Bob Sapp?
Yeah,
he's a huge monster.
He's loved there. They love him.
That goes back to what you were saying about exoticism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, you got a man that's like 150 kilos, and the big black guy that's 150 kilograms. And he's like everyone would recognize him, I reckon, in Japan. He's known there, like, what I mean?
And that's the other thing that I noticed about Japan that's very odd. Actually, we should probably wrap this up. There's a lot of people waiting. But anyway, long story short, it is a unique place, and a lot of dawah needs to be done there. So Jazakallah khair for joining us, brother Yusuf.
Well, yeah. Thank you very much for
a few tangents.
No problem.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu
Is Afif Salvi.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Wa alaikum salam. We can. Just to let you know, brother Yusuf, and anybody else who finishes speaking, that as soon as you finish speaking, please leave the studio, or I can remove you, because a lot of people are trying to enter the studio, but they can't because we have limited numbers. Go ahead, brother Afif.
Yeah. First of all, I wanna thanks you for the works you guys are doing. I really love the works that you guys are doing. So basically, I have two questions. My first question is in Surah Shams. In Surah Shams, the first 4 ayats. As you said that there are the Quran. It's compatible with the understanding of 7th century, and it's still compatible with us. How can we look to the verse of Surah Shams from verse 1 to 4 with the lens of our understanding? This is my first question. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. It says the moon follows, and how can we understand it? We know that moon follows the sun. How can we understand it?
The moon does follow.
Yeah, I know. The moon does follow. But
what's the problem?
The problem is, like, in the third verse, it says وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا. And said that when the day when it displays the sun, it shows the sun. But actually, the sun, it is the sun which makes the day. We know that.
No, but what is the day?
Yeah, that's the question. What's the day? What is day?
The day is the result, right, of the part of the earth which is facing towards the sun. That's what it results from, right?
Yeah.
So the day is results from a relational connection between the earth's surface and the sun.
Yeah.
The day is not something physical in the sense that you hold it and pick it up and hold it down, but it exists out of a relationship between the face of the earth and its positioning towards the sun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the sun, the day, it says وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا. The sun as it projects this rays,
like that.
وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. And the moon as it follows the sun, which there's no problem with, because we know that the moon follows the sun.
It does
everything. Pardon?
My second question is in Surah Qiyamah. It says there were
let's go with this first. On the heliocentric model, the sun and the solar system are running through space, right?
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. So the sun, even in the heliocentric model, but you've got to remember, this is anthropocentric and phenomenological. So it's from the perspective of the human being. So from the perspective of the human being, it's the sun comes, and then the moon comes, and the day comes, and then the night
It
comes.
seems like the sun, the moon is actually. It seems the moon is following the sun, right?
Even if we don't say it's from the human being's perspective on Earth, even if we're talking about the heliocentric model, everything is following the sun as the entire solar system is running.
Yeah, it's moving in the galaxy, right?
Good. Now this third bit where it says وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا, right?
وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا. It covers the
والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والنهار إذا جلاها. Yeah. The nahar is the day. إذا جلاها, as it shows it. والليل إذا يغشاها. Yeah. والنهار إذا جلاها. So now the day is showing the sun. It doesn't say what this does not say. It doesn't say that the sun is going around the earth. It doesn't say this, which is what these individuals are. Yeah. So the day is showing the sun. If I said to you now, the day is showing the sun, absolutely. How could anyone deny that? In the daytime, we see the sun. So
the night covers the sun, and the night covers the sun.
Yeah, and so when it's the night, yeah, إذا يغشاها, so the night is moving. Yakhsha really means to be afraid of, but this is personification. So we're talking about moving away from. The night now is moving away from the sun. And we know that the earth moves, in order for night to take place, like it is now in the UK, for example, when the earth rotates around its own axis, it's moving away from the sun. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah. So can I go to my second question?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Surah Qiyamah. It says, it's maybe in verse 8 and 9, which says, وَخَسَفَ الْقَمَرُ وَجُمِيَ الشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ.
Okay.
When the moon darkens, does this imply that the moon is self-luminous or something like this? The moon becomes darkness.
This is talking about Yawm al-Qiyamah.
Yeah.
And
so
khusuf is eclipse. That's all it is.
And وَجُمِيَ الشَّمْسِ وَالْقَمَرُ.
وَجُمِيَ الشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ, when the moon and the sun come together. This is
how can we look into this? Like, we know the sun and the moon. The sun and the moon. How can the sun and moon come together when their orbits are different? When their orbits are different. Yeah.
On the day of judgment, everything is going to change. On the day of judgment, everything will change. The sun is going to be as the sun rolls around and loses light, all things are going to happen. Now, is it talking about وَجُمِعَ الشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ? Is it, once again, from the human's perspective, or is it happening actually? Allahu A'lam. Actually, this is alamat istifham. We don't know for sure. But Allahu A'lam. Even if we agree, it's the moon and the sun will come together, meaning that the sun will consume the moon. What's the problem with this? The orbits and whatever happening now, the laws of natural science, all of that is going to turn on its head on the day of judgment. Like if you look at all of the things that are mentioned in the Quran about the day of judgment, it's not assuming that the laws of nature are going to be the same. There's no assumption
I understand.
that the laws of physics are going to be the same.
Yeah, I understand that. Thanks for the time that you give.
Anytime, my friend. Does that help?
Yeah, it does help. It does help.
Yes. And khusuf is eclipse. Yeah, وخسف.
So it basically says that in the day of judgment, the moon will be eclipsed, and then the sun and moon will be joined together, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't have any doubt in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
No, for sure. We just want to understand it.
It's just some question that I have in mind, but I don't have any doubt. I'm just looking for answer, and I know there is a satisfactory answer for that.
Anytime.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Brother Afif.
Jazakallah khair. I really love the work that you guys are doing, right?
Anytime, my friend.
Next is
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Mustafa.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Welcome.
I have a question about the fundamentals of Islam. Like, what are the every single fundamentals of Islam, and which one should someone begin with?
Do you mean the basics of Islam as a religion?
Yeah.
Well, the foundation is obviously Tawheed. That is the foundation, the Shahada, the understanding that there's none worthy of worship except Allah. And then there's the 5 pillars, and then the 6 pillars of Iman. So that's just the standard view of the way that you explain Islam.
Mhm.
Are there any more fundamentals other than those ones?
What do you mean by fundamentals? Like, I'm trying to understand, because, you know, for example, we have 5 pillars, but if you mean by fundamental something else that a Muslim has to believe, such as, for example, the 5 pillars doesn't mention that we need to, for example,
a woman doesn't need to cover her hair. for example.
yeah, something like this. Yeah, good example. Yeah. So what exactly do you mean?
Like, I just meant like things like when it comes to belief in Allah and belief in the angels. Are there any other beliefs like those or not?
No. These are, look, the Prophet made it very clear that Bunya al-Islam ala khams. Yeah, Bunya al-Islam ala khams. That Islam was built upon 5 things. Shahadat la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, wa iqam as-salah, wa ita az-zakah, wa hajj al-bayt, Sawm Ramadan, wa hajj al-bayt in man istata'a ilayhi sabila. These are the 5 pillars of Islam. But the interesting thing is here, as Ibn Abdul Barr, he mentions in his sharh here of this hadith, Ibn Abdul Barr, he says that Bunya al-Islam ala khams means that Islam was built upon, it's like you have 5 pillars, like this table that this thing is on, right? It's got maybe one leg, yeah, but it's not good. But you've got like a table, right? It doesn't mean that Islam is only those things, and this is a common misconception. These are the most important things. So is it correct to say that Hajj is more important than a woman putting on her headscarf? Yes, it is more important because it's Bunya al-Islam ala khams. But is it correct to say that it's less fard than it? Then no, it's not, because they're both at the same level of wujub. Does that make sense? So this is a common misconception, because some people, they think just because a woman put, I don't know, I'm using this example, but for example, a person being good to his parents is not min al-arkan al-khams, the 5 pillars of Islam. But people think just because it's not from the 5 pillars that they can, it's not wajib. No, it's still as wajib as the 5 pillars, but they're not as important. It's not as important as the 5 pillars. Nothing is as important. Nothing in Islam is as important as the 5 pillars of Islam, because the whole of Islam is built upon them, and the whole of Iman is built upon the 6 arkan, the 6 pillars of Iman, which is al-Iman billah wa malaikatihi, al-Iman billah, malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawm al-akhir wal qadr khayrihi wa sharrihi. These are the 6 pillars of Iman. That you believe in Allah and His is Allah and His angels and His prophets and His books, and the qadr, khayr, the good of it and the bad of it, and the last day, and the qadr. These are the 6 pillars of Iman. So these are the most important things. 5 pillars of Iman and 6 pillars of Islam. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked in the very famous hadith of Jibreel, that is in Nawawi's hadith, he says Umal Islam, and he said the 5 pillars. Umal Iman, he said the 6 pillars. And then you have Umal Ihsan, and then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara, fa in lam takun tarahu fa innahu yarak. That you worship Allah as if you can see Him, because if you can't see Him, He can see you. So it's pyramidic, if you like. You've got Islam, which is the basis, then you have Iman, and then you have Ihsan. Ihsan is at the top. This is in terms of level of importance. At the apex was Ihsan. So now, when you're Muhsin, so you've got a Muslim who's the base level, and then you've got the Mu'min who's level 2, and then you've got the level 3. The gold standard is the Muhsin, who has taqwa. So this person, he's worshipping Allah as if he can see Him, like as if Allah is right next to him, as if he can see Him, right? But even though he can't see Him, Allah can see him. So in other words, this is the way you should think about Islam in terms of hierarchy. And obviously, All the other things are subsidiary, but it doesn't mean that they're less wajib or less obligatory.
Yeah. So Jazakallah khair, brother Mustafa, for your questions.
Like I have another question. So
Okay,
like
just before the question, your previous question, it wasn't really related to the live stream. The live stream is about the arguments for Islam, the arguments against Islam. This question was more just a general question about Islam. And as I said at the beginning of the live stream, we want to avoid those questions and just go to the questions about the arguments for and against Islam.
okay, but like my second question, it's about related to dawah, and like if I go and give dawah and I use my arguments, and like what if someone uses arguments at me that I don't understand, and that I'm not able to answer them? What exactly do I do?
Well, the thing is, if you don't know the answer to them, you say, I don't know the answer to them, and you go and try and find out the answer. All human beings are students, and it doesn't matter if you've been giving dawah for 30 years, you will come across things that you don't know how to respond to. And obviously, the scholars of Islam and what we get from the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ as well is to convey what you know and do not speak about what you don't know.
Thanks, Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Next is brother Faisal. Jazakallah khair, Mustafa, for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you, brother Faisal?
I'm fine, how are you?
Alhamdulillah.
So my question is something that you guys addressed already once before. I don't really know if it is, if it agrees with your conditions that you set for the questions that are supposed to be asked here. But if it's not, then forgive me for that, and you can just, continue to the next person, inshallah.
Sure.
So it's basically in regards to the basis for all the work that you guys are doing at Sapience Institute and also at IERA and so on. And that is the question of, once again, the question of philosophy in Islam and whether or not it should be used in dawah. Now, this question, as I know you already addressed it before and so on and so on and so forth, but I kind of found it not fully satisfactory how you dealt with the problem, with all due respect.
Sorry, what was that? What was the? I wasn't. Sorry, I apologize. What was it?
He just woke up.
Sorry, I just know because someone was calling me.
No. Let him continue.
What was he saying?
No. He hasn't completed his question, but it's to do with the question of using philosophy in dawah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
He's playing Angry Birds before you.
So the point is that now I have been following your works for at least I don't know. I still remember London Dawah movement with Subboor back in the days. It's long ago.
Yeah.
So I really know why you guys are doing this, and I appreciate it, and I understand the need for it. But on the other hand, I am somewhat of a traditionalist Muslim, also in fiqh and so on, and I know what the scholars say in regards to using these philosophical arguments and so on and so forth. And I don't really see how to, find an agreement between both sides. So I see the need for it, but on the other side, I also understand the arguments of the scholars who say that this is kind of dangerous and so on and so forth.
What scholars? Give me an example.
I just read a statement of Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, for example, yesterday, where he said that, he went into this whole kind of discussion of the people who indulge in philosophy and argumentation, and that it darkens the heart, he said, basically, and that the people who, busy themselves with that, afterwards, they kind of regret it, so to say, and so forth. It would be just nice. What I'm trying to say is basically this: we're all not.
Salah al-Fawzan's qawl la hujjah?
For sure not.
Okay, so what in particular of the evidences that he presented that made you convinced?
It's more in relation to the statements in regards to the Salaf and their approach.
Give me an example of the Salaf. Which ones what they said?
Now you have me cornered.
No, I'm not trying to corner you because I'm like, you know.
Okay, to be fair, I don't have a statement right now
Like
here,
a
but
chef
what,
when he said that those who do kalam,
for example,
that's
that's a famous one. But no, what I'm just trying to say is basically like we are all not fuqaha, right? Like, and no one tries to say that here. I think also from you guys at Sapience Institute.
Yeah.
And what I would really appreciate is if the discussion of this question, because I think it is extremely important, can be raised to the level that you maybe invite a scholar or a student of knowledge that you have interacted with in the past to discuss that question, because
we have you
Okay.
seen, for example, like here's the issue though, Akhi. What's your name again, brother?
Faisal.
It's the issue is I'm sorry to be a little bit, you know, the issue is madkhalism. And this is, I'm not saying you're a madkhali, right? But
No, I'm not a madkhali for sure.
no, I'm not saying you're a madkhali. I'm not saying you're a madkhali. But the issue is madkhalism. I'll tell you why I actually pin it down to this. Because madkhalism, although not many people are card-carrying madkhalis, like you yourself, I know you, mashallah, you're not madkhali, alhamdulillah. However, a lot of people are influenced by their definitions of what constitutes a scholar and what doesn't constitute a scholar. That's the first thing, okay? So for example, if I ask you, so give me some names of scholars outside of Saudi Arabia that exist today.
Sheikh Wasiullah Abbas.
But he's in Saudi Arabia.
It's kind of from India, isn't he?
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about where they're ethnically from.
You're absolutely right.
So he's based in Saudi Arabia. Tell me someone who's not based in Saudi Arabia who's a scholar.
This is actually something I was thinking about a few days ago. I had a discussion with someone on Twitter, and I actually realized like how influenced I am by the Saudi scholarship in general. Like I don't even know much about scholars outside of Saudi Arabia.
I understand this, but there is a reason for this, okay? Mm-hmm. If you look at the kind of like the aqwal of the ulama, when they talk about what constitutes a scholar, right? Mm-hmm. It's very, let's be honest, it's very subjective. It's actually extremely broad, yeah?
Yes.
It's very subjective. Like a Shawkani has some kalam on it. Okay, he has to have ilm al-ala. He has to have instrumental knowledge of the usul and of the furu' and of, for example, a hifz of Quran. And there's mukhtalaf fi. Does he have to be hafid or not? Does he have to memorize the ayat of ahkam? There's all this kalam on what constitutes a scholar. Mm. But it's actually, what constitutes a scholar is much more mutawaffir, if you want to call it this. It's more, you'll find it all over the Muslim world. All over the Muslim world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But the problem is the madkhali influence has made it so that other Salafis, especially the ones who, like, for example, follow the lajna, and this is good, mashallah, no problem, they will confine scholarship to 70-year-old Saudi Arabian men, okay? And they will not be able to find counter examples of that. If you ask them where are the scholars, they'll say there's no scholars except for this place, okay?
And that's wrong. I agree with that.
All right. So if now this is the problem, because now when I asked you who is the one that you're consulting in order to come to conclusion, you said, Sheikh Fawzan. But Sheikh Fawzan, he's very good, mashallah, in Hanbali fiqh. He's very esteemed. He's a great scholar, but he's not the Pope. We can agree that he's not. We don't have a Pope figure. We don't in Islam. We don't have a Pope figure. Yes. So the hujjah becomes the Quran and the Sunnah. That's what the hujjah becomes, you see. Mm-hmm. And so what I want to say is, if you believe in Salafism, and then look at the aqwal of Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, Sheikh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah on this. Read Ar-Radd al-Mantiqiyin. Read that book like from cover to cover, and tell me what conclusion you really come with. There's aqwal of Ibn Taymiyyah. He's saying that sometimes you need to make philosophical arguments, and he actually says, with certain people, you need hujaj kalamiyya. And I've put this stuff on my Twitter if you want to go and chase it. Mm-hmm. For certain people, you need hujaj kalamiyya. Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, when he's talking about Darut Arab al-Aql wal-Naql, he says, I was reading this book and I didn't understand what it meant. That the reason why Ibn Uthaymeen is because it's not his area of specialism. It's not aib. His area of specialism was other areas. It's not kalam. It's not aib for him to say that. He's very humble for saying that. It's very good for him to say that. But it doesn't mean now that we're going to rely all our lives, we're going to confine ourselves, because there's some ulama who have not specialized in kalam and aqwal ulama fi hadha al-bab, and then they have not been able to give us an opinion on basira, on insight, because they just have not done tanawul of these works. And we're going to confine the whole da'wah has to stop because of the buck stops with Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan or what Ibn Uthaymeen says. No. We say that if we want to go back and see what the ulama of old did, the mutaqaddimin, the mutawassitin, and the mutaakhirin, all of those people from the beginning of Islam, and how they all argued in Sharh al-Aqidah al-Asfahaniyya of Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, he's going for an Ash'ari Aqidah, and he is saying this argument is good, this argument is not good, use this argument. He's got a kitab called Mas'alat Huduth al-Alam, Ibn Taymiyyah. And in it, he's arguing how the universe came into existence. How would you argue God's existence? It's very difficult to argue, and no one would accept that Ibn Taymiyyah did not indulge in philosophy. It's impossible to say this. And in terms of what you've asked, we brought Sheikh Abdullah al-Ujairi, who's very well respected in Saudi Arabia. He's Saudi Arabian, in Saudi Arabia, in the Arab world. He's more than a student of knowledge. And he's, believe me, he's more mufaqqaf on these issues than 99% of the ulama of Saudi Arabia. He knows these issues very well. And just look at the Green Room episode we've done, which has been translated, you know.
Are these topics in
Arabic?
I didn't watch that episode.
Watch that episode, maybe inshallah you change your mind. But it's not just, okay, the Salih Fawzan said X, yani X. La. This is far away from that. The truth. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's just, Sheikh Rabi'a said, what? Yani, so what? And who made him the Pope? No one made him the Pope. So
I mean, what I would like, could there be some kind of collaboration maybe with, I have seen you collaborating with Sheikh Abu Safiya a few years back. So
yes.
Could you do something with him on that topic maybe again?
I think that Abu Safiya is one of the most well-grounded students of knowledge in the West. But he's very busy, and he's got big family, and he's you know, I'd love to collaborate with him, but I know he has a very similar view, if not exactly the same view as I have. You know, in fact, he will argue this in a more convincing way because he knows the maqulat and his.
That's the point, right?
Right.
What I'm basically just trying to say is I agree with it, and you know.
But if you wanna just read something, read Sheikh Abdullah al-Ajadi's kitab. Even someone like Sultan al-Umairi, like these are I believe, Sheikh Maher Amir, you know, he's a Bahraini, he's a very young guy, but he wrote a book called Al-Intisar al-Tadmuriyya, something like this, Sharh of Tadmuriyya. Look at how this guy has ta'ammuq. He's like 30 years old or something, but with all due respect, like compare his kalam and his contribution on kalam and Ibn Taymiyyah's works on kalam, or his works on intellectual contribution with Fawzan. There's no comparison. It's clear that one knows the subject matter and the other one is not as well versed on this matter. And that's not because it's aib. But Salih al-Fawzan is not God. Yani, I know that he doesn't know everything. He can't do takhassus on everything. It's takhassus, fiqh, fatwa. He's a big alim. We really respect him. We love him. But it's just not his takhassus, specialism. If he opens Dar al-Ta'arud, he won't know what's going on. Because you know why? Because he has not read the books of Al-Razi as much. He wouldn't indulge in it. He believes it's haram. He told us. He believes it's haram. Ibn Uthaymeen, he tells us he doesn't even believe it's halal. There are some. So if you don't believe think about it. If you don't believe it's halal to read books, we have to assume the best in you as a scholar. Khalas, you're not going to touch the books of Al-Razi. You're not going to touch the books of Al-Ghazali. You're not going to touch the books of Ibn Rushd. You're not going to touch the books of Ibn Sina. So khalas, you cannot make a judgment. You cannot. If you don't touch their books, you can only do secondary source naql. That's all you can do. So we have to know who's good at what. Like a lot of these scholars, they're very, very good at hadith. And we really, like Albani, for example, extremely good, a contributor in hadith. Even though I don't necessarily take his authentications, to be honest. But I give him his credit on that matter. But in fiqh, compare him with Ibn Uthaymeen and Ibn Baz. These are much higher than him in fiqh, no doubt. No one would argue to the contrary. So people need to kind of know where people's strengths are. When people know where people's strengths are, that's 50% of the game. If you're going to go and ask someone who's like, you're going to ask me about some very deep matter of science and biology, that's not my takhasus. So go to someone else. And I say the same thing with this, with all due respect. It's not their field. Simple as that. They have no contribution in that. And they are ulama in other areas, but they are not ulama in this area. I would say they are not ulama in the areas of comparative kalam theology, systematic theology. They're not. They are lay people, actually, students of knowledge on these fields. Rabi al-Madkhali is a student of knowledge when it comes to intellectual contributions. He's not. He even said it himself. Do we consider him a liar? No, I don't think so. When he said, I'm a student of knowledge, I believe him, actually. Especially when these things, he's definitely a student of knowledge. He is not alim when it comes to intellectual contributions. So I think that we put these, if you're going to confine yourself to these ulama, you will be dumb, bro. You're going to be dumb. If you confine yourself to the fatawa of don't go and look here, you're going to be dumb, and you're going to make your family dumb, and the community is going to be dumb. We have to think past this, and we have to look away from that and look at the kutub, really read the kutub of Ibn Taymiyyah and what he says about these masail. That's what, wallahi, and yes, people like Abu Safiya, he's much higher level student. He should be coming out and doing this work. I totally agree with that sentiment.
So, what is my suggestion is basically if you could try at least to have some kind of podcast or something like that again with a student of knowledge in regards to that question. Is that possible? Is that something you plan or? Yeah,
it's no problem. Listen, this is what I'm saying. Look, you can't be mukhtas in everything. This is clear. You can't be a specialist in من تكلم في غير فنه أتى بالعجائب. Whoever speaks in other than his field of specialism is going to come with weird things. Ibn Hazm is one of the greatest scholars of Islamic history. You know this, Ibn Hazm. Yeah,
I know Ibn Hazm.
Okay, and you know what he said? He said that if you go to Hajj and you have Safa and Marwa, we believe you do sevens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He believed doing it 14 times. He was one of the only people in history who believed doing it 14 times. You know why? Because he never went to Hajj. So he didn't understand, he didn't have the amali experience. He believed doing it 14 times. He said he's a genius, actually, one of the greatest scholars we've ever had. But he had some blunders because he just didn't have experience in this area. That's Allah made us like that, actually. He made the ulama and he made the awam and he made the tullab like that. It's takamuli. Everybody comes in with their specialism and they come and help each other out. The karitha is, the problem is, when someone who's not a specialist in the field speaks on authoritatively on it, as if they've done ihata of the. No, you haven't done ihata. I would go to Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan for fatwa, and I'd go to Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan for Hanbali fiqh. This is what I would. But I would not go to Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan for knowing the deep aqwal of what the mutakallimin said and what Ibn Taymiyyah meant when he said this and that al-ta'arud. I wouldn't. I don't see how you think that would be a good motive. There's no contribution there. He believes it's haram to read those books. So you need to know who to consult when, you see. And this is no disrespect to the ulama. This is actually giving them their correct respect, showing the people where they stand, what they're good at. You need to know.
The problem is you're talking about people not being the specialist in this field or that field. I don't speak Arabic, and I think that goes for most people here. And the issue is that I was thinking about that question for a very long time now, and I don't really have anybody in the English world that I can go to and ask these questions, and that's why I'm suggesting that you maybe if you have the time and the means and so on.
There are some people like Abu Sufyan, I'm sure if you Instagram him.
Oh, I tried that, man. I actually had contact to him, but he's very, very busy and he didn't really give a very good answer. It was a bit.
So what can we say? Bro? Look, at the end of the day, you're gonna have to have malaka. At one point, you're gonna have to go learn Arabic, because if you're really suffering like this, you can't be like a blind man in a dark room, blindfolded, trying to grab a poncho. What's that thing that what's it called? They try and bash
Pinata.
Pinata or whatever, I don't know what they call it, pinata or whatever.
Pinata.
Bro, go learn Arabic and then you'll start seeing the ulama are many actually in the world. Today on Twitter, I showed some ulama from different parts. Like you have Said al-Kamali in Morocco. Big alim. He's not just an alim, he's a big alim. Some people say, oh, why are you calling him alim? He's quite young. No, he's an alim. He's an alim, he's a muhaddith. You have someone like Wild Shanqiti. He's a huge alim in the Muslim world. He has different opinions to the Saudis on many, many, many issues. And he's still athar in aqidah. You see, if you're confined to that school of thought, khalas. But I personally say there's no problem in going to people who ash'ar in aqidah in fiqh. If you're an athari, there's no issue with it. What's the issue with that? Like Mufti Taqi Uthmani. He's a huge scholar, one of the biggest in the Muslim world, you know, and you can't take away the guy's ilm. Jahan Bori, the Sheikh Yunus, huge scholar of hadith, Deobandi, and he's done like shuruh of the hadith. It's beautiful. It's comparable with the classical works. Amazing stuff. I actually have ijazah from him in all the hadiths. He's a fantastic scholar. You have to start thinking, and when you go to, there's Indian scholars, there's Moroccan ones, there's Somali one, subhanAllah, and then you start tawassa', then you become more open-minded. But if they want to squeeze you into Sheikh Fawzan and Sheikh Rabi'a, khalas, your experience as a Muslim is going to be horrible. I'll be honest with you. It's like khalas, Islam ukhtusira fi ha'ula. Islam is 3 or 4 scholars. The Islam is very narrow religion. Might as well be an Ahmadi, because Ahmadis have more scholars than that kind of Islam. It's ridiculous. Honestly, we have a lot of scholars in the Ummah, and you just have to open your heart and open your mind to them a little bit more. Learn the Arabic language, and then you'll start to realize why Sheikh Fawzan, why him, but not Ad-Dado, for instance. I don't get it. Give me a mi'yar, give me a reason. Or because he was praised by the other one. But the other one was praised, but just because he was in Mauritania in a village and he doesn't have access to the same propaganda machine, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have the same knowledge. It doesn't mean that. These people are all ulama. We have to respect them. When you start to realize his Arabic is good, his is amazing, his hifz is amazing, his istihdar is amazing, his fahm is amazing, then you start to realize to yourself, why am I preferring these ones to these ones? It's because I was forced into that narrative.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Brother Faisal and Hijab, for that back and forth on an important topic, which I do think, needs to be emphasized more. However, I would say if you go back to some of the earlier live streams, this topic was thoroughly dealt with. And if you don't agree, okay, no problem. But obviously, we just try and articulate the best way that we can. So, Jazakallah khair for joining us, Brother Faisal. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Next is our brother Bosnian Muslim, Edin.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
So, just for clarification, right? This is only questions about Islam, right?
Yeah, I mean the arguments for and against Islam.
I just wanted to clarify. So the thing is, initially I had 2 questions for Mohammed, but I can only want to ask one, so I'm just going to ask you what you prefer me to ask about. So one was, I guess, about kalam, cosmological arguments, and the other one was about madhabs. So what would you prefer me to ask? If you have
the madhab one may not be relevant to the live stream, and this is something I want to avoid. Okay,
perfect. So the question is basically when someone uses the the typical kalam cosmological argument, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it has a cause. Then obviously you have an on-cause cause because it has to be infinite. I don't how, for example, you are dependent on your parents, right, to come into existence. But after you come into existence, now at 18 years old, for example, I'm not dependent on my parents to exist. So how do I kind of respond to someone that says, well, you believe Allah is maintaining the universe, but how can you prove that Allah?
Yeah, and I think I've understood the question. And Al-Ghazali mentions this in his Kitab Al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad, actually, where he mentions this argument. كل شيء له بداية له سبب العالم وله بداية إذن العالم وله سبب. That everything that begins to exist has a cause. The world has began to exist, therefore the world has a cause. He differentiates between cause and dependency, and this is an important differentiation. Even Tufayl, one of the thinkers, Islamic thinkers, he says that when you're arguing for God's existence, you should do so on a double track kind of argumentation, not just using causation, not just using dependency. So for instance, with causation, I can cause a house to be in existence. I build a house, yeah, and then I die. Okay, the house continues to be in existence and it's not depending on me. So you've conflated between dependence and causation. Dependence is not that, okay, that the thing led to the other thing. That's the case of you and your parents. Your parents led to you. That's causation, okay? Dependence is different. Now, dependence means if this thing does not exist, then you will not exist. And I'll give you an example of that. So for instance, let's say, for instance, a tree. And I think I've used this example in many places. A tree depends on sun in order to continue existing because it requires photosynthesis. So as soon as the sun goes, it's only a matter of time until the tree will die as well. You get it? Yeah. So here's an easier example. The sun and its rays. The rays of the sun depend on the sun. No sun, no rays. The continued existence of the sun explains the continued existence of the rays. So if you have no sun, you will have no rays. Acceptable?
Yeah.
So we have to differentiate between causation and dependency. When we're talking about an infinite series of dependent things, it's different from talking about an infinite series of caused things. Wherein in the latter, the infinite series of caused things, the thing doesn't have to be there in order for continuation to be there. Like your parents could conceive you and then they die and you continue. And may Allah give your parents long life and so on, and your grandparents, whatever it may be. But you see the point?
Yep.
So when we argue from contingency, the argument is not saying that it's like a man building a house and then dying and the house continues. The argument is saying it's like the sun and its rays. If you get rid of the sun, the rays will not exist and cannot exist. So and if you deny that, then you will have nothing, because the point is you can't have a set of only dependent things. Because if you have things depending upon other things, ad infinitum, there'd be no reason for anything to be in existence and nothing would stand. So for instance, take this as an example. Take the example of, I give this example. I don't know if it's a good one. You tell me if it makes sense to you. Take the example of the sea. Yeah, if you go now to Brighton or one of those places where there's a sea, yeah, and you look into this, you're going to see a sea like waves and a sea and all that kind of thing, yeah? Now, have you ever seen the sea floor?
I've not seen it, but I know it exists.
Yeah, you know it exists because without it, the foundation, the sea floor is like the foundation. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so without that foundation, the water would not be able to stand. Likewise, without an existential foundation to the universe, nothing would stand in existence. Everything would fall. Everything would fall. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it actually really does.
So when we're saying dependence, it's not the same as saying causation.
Yeah, so I understand that I conflated the two.
And when you make the argument on, as Ibn Tufayl mentions, on two tracks, okay, this actually gives the atheist nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Because if they're going to say, oh, something's like you can create and then leave, like the man who builds the house and dies, yeah? But we're saying, no, it's not like that. The similitude is not just like that. It's like that, but also like the sun and its rays. So dependency is much more powerful than that. And you can just argue on dependency. You don't even need causation. You don't even require causation to make the argument.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. What I was actually wanting to say was I actually really enjoyed your recent video that you posted on the whole Jordan Peterson interview, because we actually talked about the Ayan Hirsi Ali thing in my Dutch lessons about women oppression and so on, which is funny enough. But yeah, I really enjoyed that video. And Brother Subboor, I wanted to ask, on Monday is there another Salam stream?
Yes, inshallah. 6 o'clock UK time. We're going to be live.
Is there going to be like a format to that, or is it just like open?
Well, at the
form?
moment, we're just sort of reacting to certain videos with existing du'at and just bringing on audiences, keeping it a bit free-flowing.
Okay.
It's usually the way you want to start off live streams. So that's what we're sort of doing at the moment.
Yeah, okay, I'll definitely try to join, inshallah. Thank you so much for your answer.
Jazakallah, brother. May Allah bless you.
Likewise.
Is Al-Yaman. Wa alaikum salam. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good. So last week I was watching this this video. He's a pretty famous YouTuber. He's like this professor, and he explains science topics. So he made a video debunking flat earthers, and he made 10 arguments against it. And one of the arguments was they use the flag of scientism and claim that, oh, because scientism is a thing, then somehow that proves our point. And he basically made a very bold claim that scientism doesn't exist. And this is going to segue into one of the main arguments, or one argument against Islam from a scientific perspective. And that's into Darwinism. So I basically commented, and I was like, scientism is a real thing, and the very fact that universities don't teach alternatives to Darwinism or its mathematical challenges could kind of suggest that scientism does exist.
Yeah.
And he basically responds to me, and he says there's no alternative to Darwinism. There's biology and your religion, which is threatened by science. So I basically told him, the main arguments and how Islam was actually a cause for scientific development. But then, and I also told him about paradigm shifts and, the switch from phlogiston to the normal chemistry theory. But then he makes this objection, which is my question. He says, paradigm shifts don't result in discarding the existing paradigm. Newtonian mechanics is still correct and universally applicable. This is totally different from the rejection of an invalid theory like phlogiston. And then he says, evolution by natural selection is a process that factually occurs. We observe it. And he says, any modifications that will be made to evolutionary biology occur within this framework. So I kind of knew how to respond to him, but at the same time, I didn't want to and kind of be cornered into something, not know something. So the question mainly is about the alternatives to Darwin's mechanism and how to debunk his point about paradigm shifts.
Yeah, very good questions. What I would say is you got to win the battles which are easiest first, right? And the most decisive.
Yeah.
The fact that he doesn't think scientism is a thing, you can just give him some evidence in academia of the discussion about scientism. So Susan Hack, she's written this paper about 7 types, or how to spot a 7 signs that you're something about scientism, right? Just put in her name, Susan Hack. So
how do you
Susan,
spell her last name?
Hack as Hack, right?
Oh, okay.
Susan Hack. So yeah, just put in Susan Hack scientism, you'll come up with stuff. Even on YouTube, you'll find her lectures, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is scientism and the way it's challenged by, say, Massimo Pigliucci, right? So look up some of the stuff he's been saying. So that's the easy thing to win. The second thing is this idea that
he had a conversation with Lawrence Krauss as well. No? There's a video of him where on
yes, you're right. And in fact, Lawrence Krauss says some really good. In fact, Lawrence Krauss tried to show how how mathematics is based upon science as well in that. That's a very good point. So you can watch that. The other thing you could do is look up the works of Kuhn, Thomas Kuhn.
Oh,
the structure of scientific
reading his book.
Yeah, and this whole idea that, well, scientific paradigms aren't really paradigms because aren't really, the previous is still correct. Well, let's put it this way: time and space are supposed to be fixed.
Yeah.
From a Newtonian point of view. Mm-hmm. Now, Newtonian, mechanics still works, but it works not at subatomic levels and nor at really high, levels. So again, it's just not true that time and space is fixed. Time and space is dynamic and flexible. Mm-hmm. So I think the easiest thing to do is just to challenge it by looking at the broader picture.
Yeah.
Rather than focusing in on the smaller issues. But it is kind of hilarious how you know, in the same breath he's going to say, well, yeah, Einstein's right, but Newton's stuff is still right.
I mean, even if both of them were right, that would be, one of them has to be wrong in that case.
Yeah, and also look at quantum mechanics and general relativity. They're both very successful, right? But again, maybe the examples aren't so important because people can nitpick. I think the biggest thing is to look at problem of induction, problem of underdetermination, problem of unconceived alternatives, theory ladenness, methodological naturalism itself, the broader picture. I think that's important.
And specifically alternatives to Darwin's mechanism. So how would that work? Or
yeah, you know, he said something about, you know, everything is really going to be through evolution by natural selection. Evolution by natural selection has been observed. Well, if you define natural selection as being pretty trivial, then yeah, it has been observed. But if you define it as something that can create bodies and origins of body plans and all of these adaptive features, genetic and phenotypic, then no. it's not the case that natural selection has been observed. If you just want to go to the trivial truism that the fittest survive and we can see that in peppered moths, then yeah, fine. Yeah. But that's neither the here.
Is there like a video that discusses this in detail you could refer me to, or an
just
article
if you watch,
of yours?
If you go to, if you just put in my name and then put in Oxford Brookes University, Brookes University, I've given a talk, which is, yeah, I mean, that's enough, I think, to deal with these things. But by the way, there's a talk I have on the IRA channel, about 2 hours, about science, the way, the life, and the truth. That's a good thing for you know, this whole idea that scientism isn't a thing. In fact, you could even look at the works of Alex Rosenberg. You know, he's an avid scientism guy, right? So yeah, scientism is a real thing.
Inshallah, I'll go finish him.
You could also say to him that, you know, sir, I mean, he's your teacher after all, so you have to give him that respect.
Oh yeah, I was just joking. That was a joke.
Why do you do science? Well, I do science because I want to make the world a better place. But isn't that a value-based system that science can't justify?
Yeah,
you know,
I see.
You could put it that way as well to him.
And he can't justify the claim that science could arise truth through science itself. So
yeah, exactly.
It's in very. Okay then. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you, bro. Next is Hasib Qadir.
Kabir, actually. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my brother. So my question, first of all, I'm from Germany, and my question is for you, Subboor. It's about agnostics and their point of view. So it's like they try to whistle their way out, right? So they say we want to stay agnostic about the existence of God, and if there's actually something like objective truth in the physical universe, right? So there's mathematical truth like 1 + 1 is 2, but is there such thing as objective physical truth? You know, so I'd like to know how can we argue with those people, and how can we argue for Islam in such cases?
Could you repeat that? I was trying to find it. Yeah, I sort of lost track of what you were saying in the last part.
Okay, so basically, the agnostics try to whistle their way out as far as the existence of God goes, so they want to stay agnostic about this topic. And yes, it's they try, as I said, to whistle their way out, and Islam demands from us to be certain about the existence of God and to know that God exists. But you know, they say, I'm not certain that God exists, or I'm going to stay agnostic about it. And yeah, so they ask something like, is there something, is there objective truth in the universe? You know, physical truth, truth, right? Nothing like in the mathematical realm, more in the physical realm.
Yeah.
Hope you understand the question. Basically, it's about
No,
agnostics and their point of view.
yeah, but what about it exactly? Like, what are you saying? How to address it?
Yeah, it's yeah. Yeah.
I
Yes,
mean, the way
so
you
basically they say there's nothing like there's not such a sorry, there's not such a thing as objective truth, right? So they say it's only in the mathematical realm, 1 + 1 is 2, but is there something like truth in the universe, you know? And I would like to
yeah.
know, what do you think
I
about
mean,
it?
that's not really. It's not really so many. That it's not that this describes the position of agnosticism. This is a particular type of extreme skeptic. I guess you could just show them how their worldview is totally incoherent and say, well, do you believe that's true? Do you believe what you're saying right now is true and that it has actual value? So, you know, also getting them to explain why their worldview is correct. I mean, it's I could say, well, I'm a Muslim, I believe in La ilaha illallah, right? But then the atheist is going to say, yeah, but you have
Right.
to like, give us evidence for that. Same thing here. Okay, fine. He's an agnostic, saying there's no objective truth in the universe. Fair enough. You have the platform. Go ahead. Tell us how. Tell us what's going on. Do you see? So far, we're trying to respond to them, but we haven't even asked them to justify their own position. And I think that's the first thing we need to do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Appreciate it. That's it, actually. Yes, of course. Appreciate it.
Okay. And by the way, this is something, Brother Hasib Qadir, this is something that I've been saying for a while now on these live streams, that we sometimes get questions saying, an atheist said X. The thing is, rather than coming to a live show and then trying to figure out, or even us in a discussion, trying to find out how do we address this, we first need to get them to say, what on earth did you mean by that? What's your justification? How do you know it's true? And please go ahead and provide it. I think that's extremely important, and that's one part of the conversation that we're actually missing.
Yes, yes, that's true, my brother. But it's like when they talk to me, it's like my certainty that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala exists, and they want to attack the certainty. You know, they're agnostic about it. They say we don't know, but tell us a little bit about it. So they're arguing for their agnostic point of view. So why should I believe in a God when I don't have enough evidence? You know, and they come up with some stuff like, as I said, is there something like objective truth? You know.
Sure, but if they're going to say that, they need to provide the evidence, not us. Why shall the burden be upon us? Why not them?
Because we have the certainty about the existence of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala.
Yeah, but they have certainty about their agnosticism. You can't be agnostic about your agnostic position.
I don't know.
So if, oh, I'm an agnostic, I don't really have a position, you need to give me a position. Okay, well, if you're agnostic, that is a position. You're not agnostic.
You know that you don't know, right?
Sorry?
It's basically like you know that you know that you don't know, or it's like a form of knowing that.
Yeah, it is. It is a position, and the other thing is that there are certain things they know. For example, they know evidence is important. They know, they're not agnostic about it. That's why they're saying, give me evidence. And they know that truth is valuable. Hence, they are trying to give you a platform for you to speak about what is true. They know that rationality is important, which is why they're asking for rational arguments. So, I mean, their entire worldview is incoherent because they're pretending as if, you know, oh, I'm just going to sit here and I want you to give me the arguments, when in fact, they've already made up their mind that these things are valuable, and they're definitely not agnostic about that. They definitely are sure about that.
That's a strong point. Yeah, appreciate it, brother. I don't want to take so much time. Appreciate it for your time and for the answer. Have a great evening.
Jazakallah
Assalamu
khair,
alaikum.
brother Hasib. Wa alaikum salam. Next is Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So my question was like, just generally speaking, like, how do we make sense about the fact that the believers in the world are like not exactly evenly distributed, as in like there are more Muslims in Muslim countries, like way more than the reverts in like the non-Muslim countries. So like obviously that's not an excuse for a person not to believe in God or not to follow Islam. But like even if they were exposed to the message of Islam, like they still revert less than the people who are born into Muslim families. So like I mean I have my kind of assumptions of what might be the case. But like I just want to have like a different perspective on it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple reason for that. And the simple reason is the same issue that the Prophet ﷺ was facing, which is people do what their parents do more than what is actually true, more than what is actually rational, which is why the best of generations were not born into Islam, but actually converted to Islam. The best of generations are the Sahaba. And the Sahaba, none of the Sahaba, and we're talking about the major Sahaba here, they were born into Muslim households. They were actually from backgrounds which were non-Muslim. So most people, they do the easy thing. They don't do the right thing. They don't do the uncomfortable thing. So there are obviously some people who accept Islam in non-Muslim countries. There are obviously Muslims who leave Islam in Muslim countries. But people generally do what their parents do, which is why religions generally seem to be geographically distributed according to where their main, antecedents are.
I mean, obviously the blame is on them, but like, then again, like, how do we make wouldn't one say that they're more likely to be kind of successful as believers and more likely, to go to, I don't know, to believe in the first place? Like, how do we make sense of the statistical distribution? Because shouldn't it be more or less kind of equal? Like, as in, obviously it is, like, everyone has an equal chance to go to paradise, right, in a sense, but how do we make sense of it from the statistical perspective, I guess?
Well, I mean, it's a very simple point. Allah tests people according to their capacity. So, we're looking at it from a human perspective. Well, if that person is there, they would be more likely to accept Islam if they were in a Muslim country. We don't really know that. And the thing is that every person has a unique test that Allah puts them through, and Allah doesn't put, people in a certain situation that they're going to be forced to fail, right? So in a way, it's like we just have to look at it from that point of view of Allah's wisdom, of why Allah makes people being born in Muslim families and others not.
Okay. Thank you. Can I also ask like something else about like the
Sorry?
About like the Quran being like there, the issue about it being created and not created, about how there was a big debate in the past. So I don't exactly understand like the two sides. Like, what do people mean when they say it's created, and what do they mean when they say it's not created? Because I don't think either side actually meant that created in terms of written by people. So like so what do they even mean, and like how do you make sense of it?
The Mu'tazilis believed that it was created. It was a makhluk, that Allah created the Quran. The words were created. They were not. Whereas the Ahlul Sunnah position is that the words are not created, and that the words are exactly, they are a subset of an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is speech. So like I'm speaking to you right now, I have the ability to speak, and my speech is a subset of my ability to speak and my capacity to speak. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech is not created. It's not manufactured. It's a subset of one of his attributes. So the Mu'tazilis believed that it was created in the same way as human beings are created, or the universe was created. And Ahlul Sunnah believed that that's not the case.
Does that make sense? Sorry, where's the... does that make sense?
I mean, like, I just don't understand, like, I guess I can't fully comprehend in the, not in terms of how it's possible, but rather like, are the words kind of emitted at some point? And does that...
Yeah, omission. All right, look, so does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does he create?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he creates. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does he hear all things?
Yeah.
Does he see all things?
Yeah.
Right. Now all of those things, are they created? Like, did Allah create an ability for himself to hear?
Oh, I see. So when you say the words are not created, like the Quran is not created, you mean like the ability to speak is not created?
That Allah's ability to speak is not created, and that the words themselves are not created. They are omitted, as you mentioned, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that suits His Majesty, which is nothing like the khalq, like the creation. But they're not created. It's like, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not create His ability to hear, and He does not create His ability to see, and that's intrinsically, it's a part, it is an aspect of what He is, not a part, an aspect of what He is. Then in that case, the same can be said about kalam, about speech, that He did not create it.
But like for example, a single verse, or like you know, the message itself, is it kind of depending on the will of Allah, or is it it's not like part of the essence, right? It's not like a necessary. It was, I don't know how.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are broken down into two. There's the attributes which are intrinsic and necessary. Actually, all of Allah's attributes are necessary, yeah? But there's those which are intrinsic. They're called as-sifat al-dhatiyya. They're the intrinsic attributes. So for example, that Allah is pre-eternal, that He is post-eternal, that He is all-powerful, that He has all knowledge. All of that is min sifat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dhatiyya, or the intrinsic attributes of Allah. And then you have the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the will of Allah. And the will is Allah's ability to make decisions. Okay? And then you have another set of sifat or attributes of Allah called as-sifat al-ikhtiyariyya or as-sifat al-fi'liyya, which are the verbal attributes. Now, verbal attributes refer to that which Allah does. And that which Allah does is linked to Allah's will. So when Allah decides something, the verbal attributes are then activated, okay, as a result of whatever He wills. So some of the examples of those is like speech. Allah wills to speak, He shall speak. If He wills not to, He will not. If Allah wills to create, He will create. If He wills not to, He will not. So the sifat, the attributes which are fi'aliyya, they are connected to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. May I just add, like, this is not a question, but like, once you guys are done with addressing the the claims against Islam, is it possible that you can do kind of stuff about the linguistic and structural miracles of Quran?
We have that up. We have that up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Next is Ridha Khalid.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello?
Assalamualaikum.
Yeah, so my question is
right now.
My question is regarding the apostasy.
Yep.
So when actually is the death penalty for apostasy actually applied? Is it just for believing in a particular religion or a personal belief or
Well, first of all, I would like to direct
just preaching his faith to the public?
First of all, I've written a small booklet on this. It's called A Treatise on the Liberal Critiques of Ridda, which you can go and collect. It's from Amazon. It will be, because if I speak to you for 3-4 minutes, will not be sufficient. So you can get that book. In regards to, is it about belief in faith? No, it's not about belief in faith. Because if it was about belief in faith, then when Hudhayfah bin Yaman, he was one of the Sahaba, he had a list. He had a list of all of the names of the people who, for all intents and purposes, not believers. They were munafiqs. In fact, they were not believers. And the Quran says, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ. That the ones who are munafiqs, who they are in the heart or the pits of the hellfire. So, this list was there. The Sahaba knew it. And obviously it was accessible to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But the people on that list were not killed, even though, for all intents and purposes, they had not believed. So it's not about what you believe. It's about your allegiance or lack thereof to the state. And this was a classical thing that was applied. Now, if you look at implementation, and if you look at the book that I've written, you'll see that actually this thing was barely, if ever, enacted in the real world. Because even sometimes when someone would publicly come out and declare that they had left the religion of Islam, the state, for example, the Ottoman Empire, would decide it in the maslaha or in the common interest of the Muslim people and the state at large not to do things like not to impose the capital punishment. Yes, classically, no doubt, there is the capital punishment for a public retraction of Islam publicly, because their bay'ah has been there and there's a pledge of allegiance. But from a tanzili or an implementation perspective, this is where we have to think about it. Because when we start talking about abstract things and then we try and put them into implementation, that's where we have a problem. Like, for example, now in the world that we live in, if a country like Gambia or Brunei tries to enact the death, yani such a thing, even if the person came out, what would happen to this country? They would be, I mean, look what happened to Brunei when they tried this thing. So the Muslim Sharia has a flexibility, and there's a qaida which is very clear, which is ad-darurat tubihu al-mahdhurat, that necessities they they allow something which would usually be haram or not allowed to be the case to be the case. And so in terms of implementation, you'll find that there is no evidence. In fact, there's a lack of evidence, and there's counter evidence to the fact that you had in the 1,400 years of Islam, but let's particularly say in the last 300, 400, 500 years of Islam, with the Ottoman Empire and those nations that came after. For example, you had death penalties being distributed because people were changing their religion en masse. That didn't happen. In fact, more of that stuff happened in America, where people would desecrate a flag or show disrespect. And I show this and this is non-military action. I show this in the book. I give case study examples which are like for like, the same era, the same time period, and how the Ottoman Empire sometimes doesn't implement these things. And the United States of America, after Abraham Lincoln, after liberalism, after the Declaration of Independence, after the Constitution, they implement treason-based laws, because someone was turning down a flag. It's nothing to do with military. This is because it was seen as a treacherous and treasonous act, and he was killed in front of the people. For example, in the case study that I showed. So we have to differentiate between abstractions and implementation. And if we're talking about the latter, then in reality, these people have nothing to say about what we do. And anyway, who cares what they think? Because we go back to the discussion about objective morality. Who's to say that anything like this is wrong anyway? It's at the end of the day, the question of morality stunts and paralyzes, the anti-Islamic apologists from being able to make any moral claim against Islam.
So there's a hadith which Prophet Muhammad, which is recorded in Sahih Bukhari,
Yes.
In which Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told that whoever changes his religion should be executed. So is this in this context?
The hadith says, "Man baddala deenahu faqtuluh." You know, whoever changes their religion, then kill them. Now, if you take this hadith to mean whoever changes their religion, then kill them, then what about the Christians who become Muslims? Should we kill those? Like, so if someone becomes a Muslim, so then it becomes, okay, there must be a context here. Because we've already established that if we leave the hadith in its generality, it would not be possible, because Allah is speaking to the Jews and Christians of the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is speaking to the Jews and Christians, telling them to become Muslim. The hadith doesn't say whoever leaves Islam should be killed, or whoever disbelieves should be killed. It says, "Man baddala deenahu faqad." Whoever changes their religion should be killed. Now, does that mean that a Christian now has become Muslim, they should be killed? No, it doesn't mean this. Of course, it's muhal. It's impossible that could mean that. So now we're forced to talk about a set of conditions that must take place in order for these things to be actualized. When is this death penalty actually implemented? And that's what the fuqaha, the jurists, they come and say, okay, well, if the person is living in the state and they've given their allegiance and they publicly come out and they do this and they do that, and there's so many conditions that have to be put in place. Because what the enemies of Islam love to do is to take a hadith like this, cherry pick it, decontextualize it, use the segmental approach and say, this is your religion. I say, if you do what you're saying, then you're going to come to absurd conclusions. Because the hadith literally says, "Man baddala deenahu faqtuluh." Whoever changes their religion, kill them. So that means if a Jew becomes Muslim, we should kill them. He says, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah." Instead of saying takbir, we shoot him dead. Come on. The hadith therefore must be, yes, the hadith must be interpreted in light of all of the conditions and all of the qara'in, yes, which they refer to as qara'in. These are caveats, yeah, that we have to look at. And that's why Islam, especially jurisprudence, has to be looked at holistically. You don't get the hadith out and then so this is embarrassing. It's actually embarrassing, because if the hadith was to be read like that, it would mean the ones who become Muslim would be killed.
Yeah, I have one more question.
Yeah.
What was the causes of the wars of apostasy, the Ruddhawars?
Those guys at the time of Abu Bakr Siddiq, they refused to pay taxes, and not only did they refuse to pay the zakat, but they said that we don't believe in it. So look at this. You have this tribal people that they refuse taxes of a country. They want to live under a protection. Yeah, that's bad enough. And they're now saying to the people, this is not even, we should not even be doing it in the first place. What kind of nonsense is this? They think they can hang around and take the protection of the Muslim nations and reject the religion of Islam and reject the clear doctrines and not pay taxes and humiliate the ones who the Prophet ﷺ tried to who told us we have to follow them. This is why the war took place, and it was to show them who's boss. To show them who's boss, and obviously this is what happens.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for clearing it.
Jazakallah khair. Next is many prophets, one religion. Many prophets, one religion? No, we'll go to Muhammad Qasim.
Assalamu alaikum. Is my voice clear?
Wa alaikum salam. Yep, it is. Welcome to Sapience Institute Live. What is your question today?
Just before I ask the question, I just want to mention that I appreciate Mohammed mentioning that unity between the Muslims. Me, myself, I'm Hanafi, Deobandi and Ash'ari. And I appreciate that he's not isolating, like making a small group, and making religion narrow. So I appreciate that. The question was, I read the Usul al-Hadith book by Bilal Phillips, and he mentioned in that Sahih Hadith is dhanni. So he said it's like speculative knowledge. and he mentions that it doesn't create positive knowledge. It fails to create a positive knowledge, and so it's basically doubtful, right? So it's not used in Aqidah, according to some scholars. So I was thinking, why should we follow like a doubtful matter? Like obviously mutawatir is strong, and mutawatir ma'na and lafz is strong, but ahad hadith.
So brother, just before you continue, I did mention this in the beginning of the live stream, that we're not going to be dealing with questions which are not directly related to Islam being challenged or the evidences for Islam. Now, this is actually a deep scholarly discussion which I don't want to entertain on the live stream. And so if you have another question in relation to Islam's positive arguments and arguments against it, that we can take, but something like this I don't want to get into.
No, there's nothing else. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, may Allah bless you. Next is Khidr.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
So, first of all, thank you guys for doing this live stream. It's amazing. And I've been following you guys for a long time. So, thank you guys for doing this. My question is basically on philosophy of language. Usually we have this distinction between syntax and semantics. So we have the letters and the words on one side, and we have the meaning on the other side. Or we have the denotation, and we have the connotation. So my question is basically about the utterances of the Quran, right? The sentences that are in the Quran, right? Because how can we be sure of the connotation that is implied within the Quran? Because Allah obviously is a divine being, and he's not like a human being where we can tell by humans that when they say that something is red, something is blue, we know what they mean. So we know the connotation of their words. How can we be sure of the connotation of God's words if we don't have any background information on God?
Okay, so it's a very interesting question, Khidr, and Jazakallah khair for that. I think I'm pretty sure Muhammad Hijab, inshallah, has an interesting insight on this. But just before that, I just want to put out something. Let's do a counterfactual, right? So what if? So what if what you're saying is correct? What if the denotations is not sufficient for us to get a sort of a meaning for what Allah is saying? Well, the Quran in a way would be superfluous, because it would literally, you could just open it up to mean lots of different things, and it wouldn't really go far. So from that perspective, it wouldn't just be a problem in terms of understanding the Quran, but it would just undermine the whole point of revelation. The whole point of revelation is for you to actually change your life. The other thing which is interesting is that if you look at the early life of the Muslims and the life of the disbelievers and the interaction that they had with the Quran and the contentions they put up to its message, clearly, they are understanding what is meant and they are rejecting what is there. So that's good reason for us to understand that, yes, in a free-for-all sort of, from that point of view, someone can try and argue that perspective that we can't really say that this exactly means that. However, when you look at the revelation of the Quran, the purpose of the revelation and the historical events surrounding it, then that just wouldn't really add up. Hijab, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think that we have to always bear in mind with the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to human beings, okay? And we've mentioned this when we talk about science stuff, that is from the anthropocentric phenomenological perspective. So the Quran is true, and it makes most sense from the human perspective. Like in the sense that the Quran is not for dogs. Like, it's not directly addressing dogs, because dogs, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, they see black and white. Am I right? Yeah.
That's always what I've heard, but
I might be wrong. But dogs see black and white. But the Quran says مختلفاً ألوانه, like it talks about different colors. So this would be meaningless to a dog, right? Are you with me? Hello?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So this information would be meaningless. The dog has never experienced what the Quran is مختلف ألوانه. Like, for example, that the mountains have different colors. The dog would not understand, or it would not experience, or this would be irrelevant to the dog. Doesn't mean that colors don't exist, and it doesn't mean that colors are not real. But Allah is directing it to the human being. This is the point. And so Allah knows who the primary audience is, and the end user, human being and jinn, by the way. Ya ma'shar al-jinn wal-ins. You know? So for that reason, the semantic syntax, like a distinction, the connotation relates to A, the human experience, the first person subjective experience, and B, the observable reality as per the human experience, yeah, and C, the logical realities, which exist independent of the human being. That is how it makes sense in those contexts, not in the context of a dog not understanding what the colors are. So Allah says that this thing is what colors, or of an ant that can't process prose in the first place, or of an inanimate thing which doesn't have any intellection. Are you with me?
Yeah, I get your like rebuttal of this argument, and I'm just playing devil's advocate of the atheist or the skeptic when they posit this argument. So the way they usually will respond to this kind of line of rebuttal would be saying, okay, you're just begging the question. You haven't actually given me any background information on God that would tell me that he's actually speaking to human beings.
I'd say begging the question, I'd say that I'm not making a deductive argument, because begging the question is where you presuppose your conclusion and your first premise. So if I say the reason why the sky is blue is because of its blueness, that's a kind of circular argumentation. That's begging the question. That's what begging the question means. I'd say I've not made an argument of that kind of structure. I'm just saying the Quran, its own text indicates that it's directed to jinn and ins. Ya ma'shar al-jinni wal-ins. The Quran says that. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We have not created the jinn or the human beings except that they may worship. It's nothing to do with begging the question, because I'm not making the argument that something is something because something. That's what begging the question is, circular argumentation. I'll say that if they say I'm begging the question, I'd say you don't know what begging the question is. That's what I'd say to them.
Okay, the reason why I said begging the question, I get your what you're saying. The reason why I said begging the question is because when we said that Allah is speaking to human beings, He sent it down in Arabic language, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ, etc. He's making it clear that it's for human beings. They would say, okay, you don't know the connotation of when Allah says we have sent this to human beings. You don't know. He could have actually meant we have sent this down to dogs, to use your examples, right? Because they would, again, using like this kind of reasoning, this kind of line of,
I don't get it.
Yeah, because they would say the reason why I know when you say something is red is because of inductive reasoning. We have inductive evidences that when you point at something, you say this is red. Okay, we have some kind of behavioral evidence to say that we know your intentions, or we have a way of verifying your intentions or your intentional states. While when we have God or a divine being, we don't have that same kind of mechanism of verifying God's intentional states. And therefore, if we cannot verify the intentional states of God, then we cannot interpret the utterances or the sentences of God.
In light of God's intention.
Sorry?
I really don't understand. Do you get the objection?
I guess what you're trying to say is as soon as you allow that possibility, then there's underdetermination. That's what you're basically saying, that the denotations are not sufficient to establish the connotations.
Yeah, there's underdetermination because we don't have sufficient background information on the
Yeah,
divine.
but I think what Hijab is saying is that words have limits. Like if you say wing, it can refer to a bird's wing or the wing of a hospital, but it's not going to refer to a cup. Right? So I think that's where I guess you two are talking past each other.
All right, perfect.
I think we need to maybe rewind what you're saying and try and understand the interrogation a little bit. We are talking cross purposes, but I don't see the issue. Yani, I don't see the issue. Well, I don't get the interrogation. What do you get the interrogation?
Yeah, what he's basically saying is that the atheist could say that the letters of the Quran is not enough to establish the meaning, which is in a way saying that therefore in a way the Quran is undermined because it's underdetermined. So for example, when the Quran says something, someone could say, well, it's not literal, it's metaphorical. If it's metaphorical, it could basically mean this. So the letters, the denotations are not enough for the connotations. That's what he's basically saying an atheist could say. And I guess what I'm understanding from your reply is, but words have limits. You can't say, a wing referring to a cup.
No, but just can that exact argument, if that is an argument, be made about exactly what the atheist is saying in the first place? Couldn't that be made about?
It could. The thing is, they would say, again, because we're human beings, they would say, okay, we're physical beings. I can point at something. I can point at a red door and say, this is what I mean by red. So my intentional states when I do that. But with a divine being, this is the distinction they're saying. Okay, with a divine being, we don't have.
This red door example, I think, is exactly what Wittgenstein used in Tractatus. I'm not sure if it was a red door example, but he didn't argue on those lines. He didn't argue that you have to have first-person subjective experience. In fact, he was a positivist at that time before he revised his theory. And what he was saying was that words are just descriptions of realities. So it really depends on what your philosophy of language is. If you're saying that your philosophy of language depends on the intentional states of the first person or the author, and that must be exactly correlated with the end user, why should that presupposition be? Why should we assume that presupposition is true? In other words, why should we assume that it's only the case that like-minded communicators can speak to each other? Otherwise, everything will become meaningless. That's a presupposition which is actually unproven.
I appreciate you guys responding to this argument. This is a really famous argument that has been really popularized on the internet.
Who is it being popularized by?
You were on a stream, on Hamza's stream once, where you were talking to Ask Yourself, and you were talking to a guy called Jack Angstrike. And
who's the academic so I can read some of it?
Oh no, this is actually it's not an academic. It's not made by an academic. Yeah.
Yeah,
but,
so that's probably why it doesn't sound that convincing.
Yeah,
and it's neither here nor there. Do you know what I mean?
It's kind of like those people who say, well, you can't be 100% sure that the Quran is transmitted because it's transmitted orally, and then when you give them all the argument from testimony and all the checks and balances to make sure that things are preserved, then the person says yes, but there's still a chance. Well, that's fine, but it's not fine. What it's basically doing is rendering all human history redundant. Same thing applies here. There's nothing about this argument that would seem that it's applicable to the Quran alone. It just seems to be a universal thing. I guess if someone wants to take extreme skepticism to its logical end, they'd have to apply it to everything.
I just have one last question. I was reading a very short introduction by
we're sort of running out of time, so if you can keep it very brief, because we're just going to end around the 2-hour mark.
So when they say an explanation of religion, why we have religion, would be that we have a hypersensitive agency detection device inside ourselves. What would be the classical way of
So the reason why we have religion is because we have an agency detection device, and that goes into overdrive, and therefore we come up with it. So yeah, they have this idea, and they've been pushing this.
What's it called?
The agency detection module that we have, that goes into overdrive. Hence, we come up with designers and this type of thing. First thing I would say is what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So yes, it's an idea, but give us some evidence that that's the idea, because we could just turn around and say, no, that detection system is actually there put in you by Allah to recognize that behind everything there's a creator. So we could just say the same thing, and they'll say, well, what's your evidence for that? We'll say, well, first, let's ignore the module that we have for agency detection. Here's the argument, positive argument of God's existence. And therefore, a module like this would make sense. And then the atheist would say, well, this is why God doesn't exist. So again, like I keep saying, if somebody makes an assertion without evidence, before you challenge it, ask them for evidence. Secondly, these agency detection modules, which evolved in what the evolutionary biologists say is the environmental evolutionary adaptation when we were hunter-gatherers some hundreds of thousands of years ago, well, clearly it's teaching us to believe in things which are false according to the atheist worldview. Well, then what are we supposed to do? Accept the idea that false beliefs lead to survival and reproduction? And we're sort of undermining truth here, right? And truth is, natural selection doesn't give us truth fitness, it gives us, adaptive fitness. So, there's a myriad of problems which comes if somebody starts adopting that line of thinking. But yeah, that's how I would sort of summarize it.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah, I didn't mean to be the pushy with the argument that I initially made.
I didn't even think it was pushy. I was just trying to understand it, really.
No problem. And
it's a very popular thing, the agency detection thing. I think Christopher Hitchens refers to it as well. But there are other ways of attacking it as well, but I just thought I'd summarize it in that way. Jazakallah khair, Khidr, for joining us on Sapience Institute Live. May Allah bless you. All right, so we're coming to an end. We started a little bit late. Somebody messaged it's like 3 o'clock in Pakistan, but yeah, it's been good. We've had actually, lots of people from all across the world joining and commenting and stuff. Sorry we couldn't respond to the comments and get everybody on board. We try to read as many comments as possible and also interact with as many people as possible. May Allah bless you all, and we'll be live again next week, inshallah, same channel, around the same time, Saturday evening. May Allah bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.